Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make cocoa brownies, and this is what they look like. They have a really deep chocolate flavor and are moist and chewy, perfect to satisfy any chocolate craving. And what's great about brownies is they are so easy to make. So first, preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 165 degrees Celsius. And you will need an 8-inch, that's 20 centimeter square baking pan. And I like to line the pan with a piece of aluminum foil because it makes it so much easier to get the brownies out of the pan. And then make sure you have a bit of an overlap to use that as handles to lift the brownies out. And then what I like to do is either lightly butter, and I'm using a little melted butter here, lightly butter the bottom of the pan, the aluminum foil, or you could just spray it with one of those non-stick vegetable sprays, and that way the brownies won't stick to the foil. So the first thing we need to do is to melt 10 tablespoons, that's 140 grams of butter. You can use salted or unsalted. My personal preference is to use unsalted. And you can either do this, I'm just doing it in a saucepan on the stove, but you could do it in the microwave. Just over medium heat. And while that's melting, in a bowl, place 1 1/4 cups, that's 250 grams of granulated white sugar. And then, these are cocoa brownies, so we are using some cocoa powder. 3/4 cup, that's 75 grams of unsweetened cocoa powder. And as you can see, mine has a lot of lumps, so I'm going to strain it, get rid of those lumps. Now, there is 2 types of unsweetened cocoa powder. There is the just regular unsweetened and the Dutch processed. Now you could use either type. My personal preference is the Dutch processed. Let's turn that down a little. But whatever you like to use here. If your cocoa powder doesn't have a lot of lumps, then you don't have to bother straining. So, here we go. And then I'm just going to use a wire whisk just to mix those 2 things together. Okay, it's almost melted. Let's let that go just a little longer. Okay, so our butter is now melted. So what we're going to do is just pour it into our cocoa mixture. And then, now you could use either your spatula, you could use a wooden spoon, or I'm going to use a wire whisk just to whisk everything together, melt that sugar and the cocoa powder. Like so. It will still be quite grainy from the sugar, don't worry about that. It will smooth out. And then what we're going to do is add a little flavoring, 1 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Whisk that in. And then we're going to add 2 large eggs. I like to add them one at a time. And again, really want to mix these in. This will smooth out the batter. You can see. Now, because a little hard to do it with the whisk, I'm going to switch over. Now you can switch over to either a spatula or your wooden spoon, whichever you like. And I'm going to add the second egg. And again, Just really mix that in. What you're looking for is your batter to be nice and smooth and shiny. So give it a few really vigorous stirs here, a little workout for our arm. See, look at that, just beautiful, nice and glossy and shiny. Okay, that looks good. So now for our dry ingredients, it's in a separate bowl here. I have a half a cup, 65 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as plain flour. Then I'm going to add a quarter of a teaspoon of salt. Now if you use salted butter, I would probably leave out that salt. And then I'm just going to add like just a quarter of a teaspoon of baking powder. Just helps to make them a little lighter in texture. So now what I'm going to do, add that along with a quarter of a cup, 60 milliliters of sour cream. You could use, you can use either full fat, or I'm actually using a reduced fat, or a light, I think they call it, sour cream. And then I like to add a little crunch to my brownies, so, and even more chocolate flavor. So I'm going to add a half a cup, which is about 85 grams of either a semi-sweet or a bittersweet chocolate chip. Now some people like nuts in their brownies, so instead of the chocolate chips you could add an equal amount of nuts, your choice, or you could just leave it, both of those, either your chocolate chips, you could just leave them out. Okay, and just stir it. I love making brownies. One bowl, I mean, they're made in no time, and they taste so good. Okay, and that's it, we're done. So just pour it into your pan. Okay. And I'm just going to use the back of a spoon just to smooth that out. Make sure you get in the corners. So now what we're going to do is bake our brownies. Now what's really important is not to over bake them. You want to bake them somewhere between 28 and 30 minutes, or until a toothpick inserted into the center still has some moist crumbs. You don't want a clean toothpick when you're baking brownies. You want some batter still clinging to the toothpicks. Okay, our cocoa brownies are now done. The top feels firm, and then when I take a toothpick, you're still getting, I really dip it in there, you're still getting a little bit of batter on it. So what we want to do now is let our brownies cool completely in the pan. And then I find it much easier once they've cooled to room temperature to put them in the fridge for a couple of hours. That way the brownies will firm up and it makes it much easier to cut them. So now we're ready to cut our brownies. So just grab the ends of the foil, lift it out of the pan, and then just peel back the foil. Okay, and then sharp knife, and just cut them as big or as small as you want. As you can see, it's a lot easier to cut these when they've chilled a little. Now, as you can see, my knife gets a little bit of the brownie batter on there, so you can just wipe it off. Or you could have, sometimes I just have a glass of hot water and you can just dip your knife in there and clean it off if you want a nice clean cut. Okay, and I'm just going to cut myself a little one here to try. As you can see, because I buttered the bottom of the foil, you get a nice clean release from the bottom of the foil, which is good. Perfect. I love brownies. Nice kind of, a little bit of a crust on the top. A really deep chocolate flavor. And remember, the brand and the type of cocoa powder you use will determine the flavor of your brownies. And then they're really moist and chewy. Excellent. You can store these either at room temperature or in the refrigerator. Personally, I like my brownies cold, so I typically keep them in the fridge. They're also, you can freeze them. So, enjoy, and until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.